Hello, Trailblazer fans, Blazers Edge readers. Welcome to another Blazers Edge videocast here on blazersedge.com. I'm Sam Tongue along with Dave Deckard here to break down Game 1 of the Trailblazers Round 2 series against the San Antonio Spurs, and also an opportunity to look ahead to Game 2 in San Antonio. But Dave, it's been heavily covered on the site and around the country. The Trailblazers, after a heroic performance in that Game 6 against Houston, come into Game 1 against San Antonio and really get schooled on the road. Lose that game 116-92. The Trailblazers only shooting 38% from the field. San Antonio shooting above 50% from the field in that 24-point victory. So, an opportunity to talk to you here. I know that you wrote the recap that's up on the web that people can check out if they haven't already. But the first thing that I wanted to ask you, Dave, was, for me at least, and I was not at the San Antonio game, but I was at the first game in 2009 when the Trailblazers made the playoffs for the first time and played the Houston Rockets. I think we all remember that Game 1 and how there was so much excitement. It was really new territory for the team, and they go in at home, and really almost the exact thing happens. They get routed at home, and it really set the tone for the series. Seemed like this game really resembled that, Dave, and that the team had, this was really a new experience for them. Obviously, not many of these guys have been past the first round, even to the playoffs at all in their young careers. And it seemed like that there were quite a few parallels there, and I was wondering, A, if you might have seen that as well, and B, what are some of the takeaways that we can have after Game 1?
Well, yeah, I think some of the parallels are there for sure. I believe it was Jack Ramsey said once, you have to be careful not to coach on emotion, because if you coach your guys to an emotional high that brings them to a win, the very next day they're going to bottom out. And I'm not saying that the Blazers were coached this way. I'm saying rather, as you have identified, in 2009, big surge of emotion, making the playoffs for the first time in forever. Everybody's happy. They come into the game maybe kind of looking backwards, maybe riding their laurels a little bit, and walk right into a buzzsaw. Here we are now, 2014, one of the biggest moments in playoff history, vanquished the Rockets in a really emotional series. Huge high, come into Game 1 of Round 2 and crash and burn. It was like a boxing match where this young kid is coming in and does all this fancy pre-match moves and throws the shadow punches and what have you. The bell dings, he walks 3 steps in, and bam, it's over. It's just knocked out on the canvas. Now, fortunately, this isn't a one-bout scenario. It's a best of 7, so the Blazers do have time to recover and compensate. But you get the sense that the Spurs walked in knowing what the Blazers wanted to do on both ends of the court, knowing they could handle the Blazers on both ends of the court, and having seen all of this before. I mean, you're going up against the most experienced team in the postseason period, and among the most decorated. In fact, I think they're still the most decorated. I mean, nothing new under the sun for them, and I think they just watched the Blazers kind of like, yeah, go ahead, celebrate that, come on in, yeah, good to see you, and wham, Portland didn't even know what hit them.
This is kind of a situation here, Dave, when you lose by so many. I think that there's a legitimate question of, do you look at the tape, and obviously the team is going to look and see where they made some specific mistakes, but is the overall sense that you look at this and really digest it and break down what happened, or is it more we were so overwhelmed in that Game 1 that we just toss it aside, start over, you're down 1-0. That's the one good thing about this, is that even though it was such a deconstruction by San Antonio, the Trailblazers still are only down 1-0 in the series, and these games are being played on the road. So there is somewhat of a silver lining to this whole thing. But how do you approach this? What is the strategy for the team in approaching Game 2 after what did happen in Game 1?
I think first of all, you don't rewatch it in the sense to figure out what happened in terms of the game flow or whatever. We all know that, okay? I think you put away all the emotion. You put away the emotion of having beaten Houston. That's gone now. I hope that got beaten out of you, right? But you also put away the emotion of having lost this game so significantly. And when you go back to watch the tape, you look at a couple of things. I think you highlight on Portland's offensive attack how the ball went to one player and then stopped. And then I think you freeze frame there and you say, forget what's happening in, for instance, LaMarcus's hands with the ball right now. Look at everybody else on the court. What are you doing? And as you restart that film, you're going to see that everybody else was just kind of standing. Now, granted, part of the game plan was to break San Antonio down with Portland stars. That, I think, could have happened. That was the right approach. However, it's not going to work if you just telegraph where it's going. The same way it didn't work for Houston if they just pounded it into, James Harden or often Dwight Howard and let him go 1-on-3. That didn't work for the Rockets. It's not going to work for the Blazers in reverse. You want to go through your stars, but you want to run some screens, some misdirection, some motion. So at least San Antonio has to compensate for a couple things and not just watch that one star. So that's number one. You want to look at what everybody else is doing in the offense besides the guy with the ball. Second of all, you want to look at San Antonio's defense or San Antonio's offense, the way you defended them, and you want to look at what they are doing, especially in terms of setting screens. And you got to figure, look, you are switching in essence defenders anyway, because you're not leaving Lillard on Tony Parker, for instance, for the whole game. You're putting Batum in there. You're putting Wes Matthews in there. You got to say, I think, we can't be married to any single person guarding Tony Parker. If they screen, we have to switch or do something quickly to deal with this, not let that play develop and then watch Parker get free for a jump shot or a drive. We have to keep a man on him at all times. At the same time, we cannot commit extra help there because their three-point shooters killed us as well. So really, you want to look at the on-point, on-ball defense and say, this has got to be quicker, you've got to anticipate it more, and you've got to stay with your man. If you can do those two things, then you can correct, I think, a lot of what went wrong in Game 1. Not everything, but at least then you have a fighting chance.
What was interesting, Dave, is I was listening to a podcast that Zach Lowe did with Jeff Van Gundy and talking about during the playoffs, in these first couple of games of these series, a lot of times you don't know whether or not your game plan is going to work. Obviously, you have a pretty good idea and a belief that it will, but at the end of the day, you aren't entirely sure whether or not it's going to. And if it is going wrong, all you can ask as a coach is of your players to put forth maximum effort within that game plan, because if they're putting out maximum effort and it isn't working, then you know you need to change. And it's interesting that you mentioned that the team, it looked like the emphasis was to get it to the star players, obviously on Portland's side, but when there isn't as much effort surrounding them, it's more difficult to know whether or not that is the correct way to beat the San Antonio Spurs. It still might be. But I do think that, if you're only doing it at an 80% clip or only giving 100% effort, on 80% of your possessions, it's certainly, at least I thought that was a pretty interesting analysis of this whole thing, and it seemed like it had a lot of application to what happened in Game 1.
Absolutely. Sam Tongue, with your mathematics juju there, kind of befuddling my mind. But the basic premise is, you're not going to be able to beat the Spurs if they can defend you one-on-one, because you can't free up your shooters. They will contest, and that's a big problem. So you've got to create enough pressure somewhere in order to get them to commit and double team. Last night, Aldridge did not make splitter pay at all. So he has to create more pressure off of drives, going into the post, deeper, whatever it is, in order to make them commit help. Okay, Damian Lillard was effective in spurts, but mostly not. There was a lot of jump shots there. Drives were not effective. He's got to drive and dish probably a little bit more. You have to create that pressure at certain focal points, and I don't see anyone able to do it for Portland other than those two. Frankly, I think the Spurs will say whatever Wesley Matthews does to us one-on-one, we will accept, because he's going to miss most of his shots, and those he hits won't kill us. So you've got to do that. You've just got to do it a little more aggressively, a little more creatively. Another switch on the defensive end that we haven't mentioned, I don't know if you noticed last night, but basically the Blazers had LaMarcus Aldridge on whatever center the Spurs had in, and Robin Lopez left watching Duncan. And I don't think that's going to work, because Duncan obviously hit some of those mid-range shots. Lopez, as we know, all season cannot come out of the lane. You have to bag that, I think. You have to just go ahead and put Lopez on whatever other big guy they have in there and say, I know you have to do extra work here, LaMarcus, but you got to guard Timmy, and you got to take him out of the game, and you got to stop that mid-range jumper. And I think the Blazers will probably do that for Game 2, I'm guessing, and I think you'll see a little more success there.
To move away from the X's and O's a little bit, Dave, I was watching this game yesterday and thinking to myself, it's bad. You know, obviously the team is not playing the way that we've seen them play, and then you also sort of are watching a championship caliber team running on all cylinders, and really had that wake up call in that 7-game series with Dallas. But I wasn't necessarily watching it with the same sense of urgency, with the same stress level as I was watching against. When the team was playing against Houston. I think that, you know, sort of the expectations of the team heading into that first-round series was, if they get through this, it's a successful season. You know, we really couldn't have asked anything more of this team after that. And I think that I was much more relaxed, or I know I was much more relaxed watching that game, even though it was a blowout. Am I naive thinking that? You know, is this something where obviously the team wants to be hungry? And I don't think that they were necessarily relaxing quite the same way I was, but it didn't seem like, you know, at least as someone watching the game, there was the same amount of angst during it. And I'm curious if that was something that you experienced too, or if, you know, maybe I'm the only stress-free Blazer fan at this point.
I think it's generally true of the fans. I think it might well be true of the players. Keep in mind, these guys haven't won a lot. I know 54 wins is good this year. Congratulations, yay. But these guys don't have playoff experience. They don't know what they're fighting for, and they don't know how hard they have to fight to get it. And I think there probably is a sense, because they're human, of, well, mission accomplished. We did really well. How could you not have that feeling looking back on how they beat Houston? However, what you don't realize is, if you carry that over into the next series, San Antonio will bend you over their knees and give you a paddling, and they will not let up. They will not let up in Game 2. They will not let up in Game 3. They will not let up until they have won, because they know exactly what they're fighting for and how hard it is to get there, and that is what the Blazers are going to have to start to learn. They're also going to have to decide if they are content. I swear to you, if they're happy with where they are right now, they are going home, and they can be happy at home. And the Spurs will be overjoyed to send them there. If they want to put up a fight, they have to get a lot less happy, and they have to get a lot more intense. Here's another thing that worries me, is that the Spurs know what they're doing. I mean, it was like a textbook. How to beat the Blazers last night with the screens, with the defense. I mean, they didn't just know where the Blazers were. They knew where the Blazers were going. They met them. They ambushed them, basically. That's different than that Houston 2009 series. Obviously, Houston had the experience gap there in their favor, but they really punished the Blazers physically. They knocked Portland's block off and kind of made them woozy, and the Blazers never came back from that. The Spurs didn't physically dominate the Blazers. They just absolutely, it was like a chess match where they went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, checkmate. And it's like the ease of which they did that has to be worrisome, because you wonder, how many adjustments do the Blazers have, and are they smart enough to make them? Not just with the coaching staff, but can the players translate that onto the floor when you get anticipated so drastically do you have a plan, not even plan B, forget that, do you have a plan like F somewhere that you can pull out and that you can get out of the line of that ambush? And I do not know whether the Blazers have that, and that's another real concern. Mentally, emotionally, you have to really be concerned right now, and you have to hope the Blazers pop back significantly in Game 2.
All right, so you sort of set the table on this one. What is the point of emphasis for Game 2? You know, there's, as you said, that it was a clinic. It was unbelievable how many open shots San Antonio got in that Game 1. It seemed like on every possession, they knew exactly where the ball was going to go, and they knew exactly who was going to get the shot. And then on the defensive end, as you also mentioned, it was the exact same thing, that they knew exactly where the Trailblazers were going to do, or at least they knew what to do when a guy got the ball, that they knew it was going up. So what do the Trailblazers focus on in the Game 2? There's clearly a plethora of options, energy probably being one big part of that. But what are a couple of the things that you are looking specifically at in the Game 2 to really stand out for the Trailblazers specifically?
Okay, I've heard two things stated explicitly by people. One, the shots weren't falling on offense. Two, the Blazers didn't play good defense. I focus on the latter because you know what? You have nights when the shots just aren't going to fall. And frankly, I think it's going to be easier for Aldridge and Lillard to hit some shots and correct that. That will self-correct in a way, okay? The defense is a real problem. You have to run that tape and say, basically, guys, this is bull something, okay? If you are not going to commit harder than this, we have no shot. You let them score 116 points. You let them make mincemeat out of you. And part of that was schematic. Part of that is flaw in the Blazer defense that's been there all year, granted. But you cannot let it get that bad. And if you don't correct this, we are done. And I think rebounding is part and parcel of that. Those offensive rebounds that the Spurs got, that is junk. They do not do that, as I've said repeatedly. And the Blazers did not make life hard enough on the Spurs with those rebounds. Some of that was the defensive breakdown. Their rebounders had to commit to defend, and then they weren't there for the rebound, blah, blah, blah. It's got to tighten up all the way around, and that is my point of emphasis for Game 2. If you miss shots, if San Antonio defends you well, so be it. I will live with that. But if you do not return the favor to them, what are we doing here? Then let's just la our way through the rest of this series. Because if you do not shut them down, if you do not make them doubt, they are just going to run roughshod all over you.
Well, and you've been talking about this offensive rebounding advantage that the Trailblazers can have. It was actually pretty much even. I think the Trailblazers might have had one or two more rebound. Offensive was it one more?
Yep.
And they barely had an edge in the total rebound category as well. So, and that was about the only category that they had any advantage in at all. So, the team certainly needs to be crisper on that in that area.
And the point would being, I'm counting team rebounds in here as well, which I don't think are counted the same way, but San Antonio had 9 offensive rebounds in the first half. 9. I mean, that's like 18 for the game. That's an obnoxious amount. And you could argue that the reason they didn't get them in the second half was because
they were on cruise control.
Exactly. So you cannot do that. I mean, you have to tighten up that entire end. And if you lose, go down losing honestly. Go down losing because you missed those shots and they knew you and defended you well. Don't go down losing because they made a mockery out of your D and your rebounding.
Well, Game 2 will be on Wednesday. That game you can catch at 6:30 on the West Coast, 9:30 on the East Coast. Game 2 at San Antonio. The Trailblazers will. Gosh, Dave is. It's been so difficult. I think Dave might have been sick last night, both physically and emotionally after that Game 1. So, but check everything out, pregame, postgame, here on BlazersEdge.com and the in-game thread as well. And that's going to do it for us here on the Videocast. We'll see you all after Game 2 as well. And we will talk to you all then. For Dave Deckard, I'm Sam Tongue. Talk to you all in a couple days here on BlazersEdge.com.